Jovi was quiet again, sitting across from Yara like a ghost in his own home. You could feel the weight in the air, not the loud, crashing fights people expect from reality TV, but something heavier, something that creeps in slowly, unnoticed until it's too late. In the previous episodes, you might have missed it if you blinked. Yara asking simple questions, small requests for attention, little attempts to connect, all met with silence or distracted nods. That slow drip of neglect builds faster than you think. And Yara? She's no fool. She knows when someone is emotionally absent, even if they're physically present. She's learning to survive in a space that should feel like home, thinking not about revenge or drama, but about protecting herself and her child. Jovi's withdrawal isn't dramatic. It's subtle. A tightened jaw here, a quick glance at the phone there, the kind of gestures that scream, "I don't know what to do," without ever saying a word. Fans online love to call him distant, but in reality, he's frozen, paralyzed by his own inability to meet the tension. Every small ignored moment, every silence that Yara fills with her own cautious energy, stacks like a tower of unspoken grievances. It's exhausting to watch, and yet you can see why Yara has started building walls around her heart. You notice the micro expressions, the barely there frown, the pause before answering, the lips pressed tight when something hits too close to home. These are the small signals of emotional erosion, the invisible bruises that viewers often overlook because they're quiet. Jovi doesn't yell. He doesn't storm out. He just drifts further, leaving Yara to pick up the emotional pieces. And she's doing it gracefully, carefully, with that tightrope walk of someone who knows she has to survive emotionally first. Every time she reaches out, you see the hesitation in his eyes, the way he looks away instead of engaging. That tiny retreat carries more weight than any argument ever could. Over weeks, these small tensions have compounded. A missed smile, a shrug at a request, a distracted okay instead of a real conversation. These microdramas are the invisible groundwork for the bombshell that's coming. Even before the pregnancy test, even before the confession, the cracks were showing. The subtle gestures, the tiny emotional snubs, the silences that lasted longer than they should, all of it was quietly building toward a moment that would shake both of them. And here's the kicker. Most fans didn't even notice these early warning signs. They were too focused on the big reveals, missing the slow burn tension that was already unraveling the relationship. Wait until you see how this moment has fans divided online. Yara sat down with the pregnancy test in hand, her eyes steady, but her body tense. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. This wasn't a dramatic entrance with tears and yelling. This was calculated, measured. She had to protect herself and her child first. You could see her thinking through every word, every pause, making sure nothing she said could be twisted or used against her. Jovi's reaction was nothing, at least at first. His face froze, lips pressed tight, eyes scanning the floor like he was looking for answers in the pattern of the carpet. This is classic silent withdrawal, the kind of response that frustrates everyone around. Because you want action, you want words, but he couldn't provide either. He didn't lash out, he didn't storm away, he just stared. And in that silence, the emotional weight hit harder than any shouted argument ever could. Fans online instantly picked up on it. Some saying he looked guilty, others saying he looked shocked. But in truth, he was processing a reality he had been avoiding for months without even realizing it. Yara's confession wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about hitting him where it hurt. She wasn't playing villain. This was survival. She spoke carefully, almost softly, yet each word landed with the force of inevitability. She was stating facts, setting boundaries, protecting her autonomy. You could see it in her gestures. One hand clutching the test, the other steady on her knee. A subtle reminder to herself that she was the anchor in this storm. Mila, in the background, sensed the tension immediately. Children notice these things even when adults try to hide them. The way Mila shifted in her chair, the little frown she tried to mask, it was a reflection of the quiet tension that had been building for months. Emotional neglect doesn't just hurt adults. It echoes through the little ones in ways most viewers don't even consider. Jovi finally spoke, and his voice was low, hesitant, almost brittle. I, I don't know if it's mine, he said. And in that moment, you could feel the room contract. This wasn't a statement of denial or accusation. It was the raw, unfiltered response of someone completely unprepared to face the consequences of accumulated neglect. Every ignored conversation, every shrug at her small requests, every tiny retreat had led to this. Fans online exploded. Social media threads lit up with debates. Should he have reacted differently? Was Yara overreacting? Could he have prevented this? Meanwhile, the general audience was split. Empathy for Yara's careful, protective stance versus shock at Jovi's inability to engage emotionally. But here's where things take a twist even bigger than the confession itself. The tension didn't end there. Jovi's mind raced, his eyes darting, his posture shifting in small, anxious movements. He wasn't thinking about right or wrong. He was processing survival. What does it mean for him? How does he react to someone who has spent months holding back to avoid being hurt? Every fan on Reddit had an opinion, but the real story was quieter, the slow collapse of trust and intimacy. Yara's calm precision contrasted sharply with his scattered hesitation, and the room reflected that difference in energy like a mirror. Meanwhile, Yara held herself with surprising grace, showing a kind of emotional intelligence that comes from survival. She didn't attack. She didn't manipulate. She let the truth stand, and in doing so, she set a psychological marker. This was her moment to reclaim a sense of stability, even if it meant confronting emotional absence head-on. Jovi, still frozen, started to shift slightly, maybe toward acknowledgement, maybe toward retreat. Fans online couldn't stop theorizing. One thread asked, is he about to step up? Or is this the start of another silent withdrawal? Another joked about the awkward tension, but beneath the humor, the psychological undercurrent was clear. Long-term emotional neglect can collapse trust faster than any dramatic argument. Even Mila's small gestures, sitting quietly, watching her parents, echoed the stakes. She's learning, whether consciously or not, how adults handle crises, silence, and the weight of withheld attention. This is the generational ripple effect of emotional absence. And it's subtle, almost invisible if you aren't paying attention. By the time the scene ended, the confession had opened doors that nobody expected. It wasn't dramatic screaming, it was quiet intensity, and the fallout promised even more emotional shifts. Fans were left debating, Jovi was left processing, and Yara remained the calm center, holding on to both truth and survival. The next beats? You won't believe what happens when these silent tensions finally collide with social media speculation, family expectations, and the looming Dina results. Yara and Jovi arrived at the clinic in near silence, and it wasn't the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind of quiet where you're simply lost in thought. This was loaded, heavy, pregnant, with tension that had been building for months. Every small step toward the front desk felt like a countdown. Yara's hand was steady on the folder holding the test instructions, but her knuckles were pale. Jovi's fingers drummed lightly against his leg, a nervous tick he couldn't quite suppress. You could feel the room shrink with every step they took, the weight of unspoken history pressing down. Even walking into the waiting area, there was a pause, a glance exchange that spoke volumes without words. Yara's eyes scanned the room, careful, calculating, aware of every subtle movement from staff and strangers alike. She wasn't just thinking about the result. She was thinking about control, about autonomy, about how to survive emotionally no matter the outcome. The result shocks more than just Jovi. You won't believe the fan reactions. Jovi, on the other hand, looked like a man walking underwater. His chest rose and fell slowly, mechanically, as if keeping his body moving while his mind struggled to catch up. Months of emotional distance, small neglects, ignored conversations, all of it converging in a moment he couldn't undo. Watching him, you almost understood the paralysis. His withdrawal had become a habit, a reflex, and now the stakes were impossibly high. Confrontation had never been his language. Silence was safer, but here, silence could no longer shield him. The receptionist called their name, and they moved forward, the echo of their steps punctuating the suspense. The test itself was clinical, sterile even, but the air between them was anything but. Yara handed over the necessary forms, her movements precise, her mind elsewhere. Jovi lingered behind slightly, hesitating before he finally gave the paperwork, and you could see the hesitation in his posture, the slight rounding of his shoulders, the way he avoided eye contact. This is behavior shaped by months of emotional avoidance, a survival strategy when communication fails. As they sat waiting for the nurse to process the sample, you could almost hear the psychological undercurrents. Yara's mind was focused, running through contingencies. What if it's his? What if it's not? What would she need to do to maintain stability for her child? She had to navigate this with precision because the stakes weren't just about truth. They were about survival, about protecting her own emotional and physical space. Meanwhile, Jovi's mind was spinning, racing through memories he had long neglected to address. Every small ignored comment, every shrug at a request for attention, came rushing back like a tidal wave he hadn't prepared for. Even Mila sensed the tension. She had learned over time how to read the room, how to notice when the silence was dangerous. She sat quietly, fidgeting with a small toy, but her eyes flicked from Yara to Jovi and back, piecing together what words wouldn't explain. Children aren't oblivious. They absorb these undercurrents, and every unresolved tension leaves a mark. The ripple effect of emotional neglect is subtle, cumulative, and often invisible until it manifests in behavior or anxiety. When the results finally arrived, the room seemed to shrink further. Yara picked up the envelope, holding it in her hand like it was a bomb about to detonate. Jovi leaned in slightly, but not too close. He wanted to see, he needed to see, but the old reflexes of withdrawal made him hesitant. You could almost hear his internal argument, face the truth, or retreat into the safety of avoidance. The nurse handed the envelope over, and for a moment, neither spoke. Yara's hand didn't tremble, but her chest rose faster than usual. She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, savoring control over this moment. Jovi's eyes followed every movement, wide and unblinking, a mix of anticipation, fear, and unpracticed emotional engagement. He had been silent in moments of drama before, but this was different. The stakes were real, and silence was no longer a shield. It was a spotlight on everything he hadn't been doing for months. When Yara finally revealed the result, the truth was clear. The Dina confirmed what some had suspected, but it wasn't the shock that mattered most. It was the emotional fallout. Knowing the truth didn't erase months or years of neglect. It didn't fix the silence that had become habitual. It didn't rebuild the trust that had quietly eroded in small increments. The result was a fact, a confirmation, but the emotional damage was already done. Fans online exploded. Social media threads went wild with speculation, reactions, and analyses. Some applauded Yara for handling it with grace, for maintaining her composure in the face of emotional chaos. Others criticized Jovi for his silence, for the months of inattentive behavior that led to this moment. And yet, the most fascinating commentary wasn't about right or wrong. It was about how humans survive emotionally when connection breaks down. The Dina result didn't just confirm paternity, it highlighted long-term behavioral patterns, emotional survival mechanisms, and the subtle consequences of neglect. In the household, tension remained palpable. Mila seemed to sense that the world had shifted, that the adults around her were confronting truths she hadn't seen before. The quiet that followed the reveal was heavy, not with anger, but with the weight of realization. Emotional withdrawal and confrontation, or the lack of either, had real effects. Yara's careful navigation allowed her to maintain stability, but Jovi's habitual retreat left him vulnerable to both criticism and introspection. Over the next few hours, conversations unfolded carefully. Yara spoke in measured tones, reinforcing her boundaries and asserting what she needed for emotional survival. Jovi, meanwhile, tried to process, offering small gestures, tentative acknowledgments, but the accumulated distance couldn't be bridged in minutes. Every subtle reaction, every slight pause in dialogue, became a reflection of months of silence and disengagement. Even simple actions, pouring a glass of water, rearranging a seat, adjusting Mila's blanket, carried emotional weight. These micro behaviors became a silent language of acknowledgement, apology, and effort. Fans noticed, commentators analyzed, and the psychology of behavior over morality took center stage. This wasn't about who was good or bad. It was about how humans respond under pressure, how neglect shapes patterns, and how survival instincts influence every decision. By the end of the scene, the Dina test had done more than confirm a biological fact. It had peeled back layers of emotional complexity, showing the long-term consequences of disengagement and the subtle ways trust can erode. Yara's calm and deliberate behavior contrasted sharply with Jovi's reactive hesitation, highlighting how different strategies for emotional survival play out in real time. Mila's quiet presence underscored the ripple effect on family dynamics, reminding viewers that children absorb these tensions, whether adults notice or not. Online, the reaction was relentless. Threads debated, opinions clashed, and everyone had a theory about how this moment would shape the next episodes. Would Jovi finally engage emotionally, or would silence remain his default? Could Yara maintain stability while navigating both truth and emotional fallout? And more importantly, how would these behavioral patterns influence the household in the months to come? The Dina reveal was more than a climax. It was a mirror. It reflected years of micro-neglect, emotional withdrawal, and careful survival. It exposed the fragility of trust and the ways humans respond to crises when communication has failed. Fans were riveted, not just by the result itself, but by the layered consequences rippling through every interaction, gesture, and unspoken thought. As they left the clinic, the tension hadn't dissipated. It had shifted, moved, and amplified. Yara carried herself with quiet authority, aware that the truth was now a tool, not a weapon. Jovi carried the weight of realization, confronted by both fact and the history of his own behavior. Mila remained the silent observer, absorbing, learning, and witnessing how adult choices echo through family life. The road ahead was uncertain. Social media chatter hinted at new alliances, emotional confrontations, and decisions that could reshape the household. Every gesture, every silence, every careful word now had meaning. The Dina test had revealed more than a result. It had exposed the emotional architecture of a family, fragile yet resilient, fraught yet still capable of navigating survival. Fans could speculate all they wanted, but the real story was subtle, nuanced, and ongoing. The Dina was one piece of the puzzle. The emotional consequences, behavioral patterns, and survival instincts were the rest. Yara's careful navigation, Jovi's hesitant processing, and Mila's quiet observation created a layered portrait of a family grappling with truth, neglect, and the slow work of rebuilding, or surviving, in the aftermath. And just when you think the tension might settle, there's a lingering question. How will the next chapter unfold when years of silent neglect meet undeniable truth? And what subtle moves will determine whether survival leads to connection or continued distance? Online, the reactions exploded immediately. Reddit threads were filled with fans dissecting every glance, pause, and word from the Dina reveal. TikTok clips of the confession and test results went viral, with thousands of users weighing in on who was right or wrong. Instagram stories lit up with memes, comments, and hot takes. But here's the thing. Much of the outrage was focused on surface-level drama, the shock of the Dina confirmation or Jovi's silent reactions, while the deeper emotional currents went mostly unnoticed. Some fans noticed a tiny gesture you might have missed. This changes everything. Comment sections were split. One side argued that Jovi's silence was proof of irresponsibility or emotional coldness. Another side empathized with him, noting how hard it can be to process a revelation like this in real time, especially after years of accumulated tension. Yara's careful, composed behavior drew both praise and scrutiny. Praise for her poise, scrutiny for the way she withheld immediate reactions. Social media amplified opinions, but what it often missed was the quiet, ongoing suffering, the months of micro neglect, small, ignored conversations, and subtle emotional withdrawals that had set the stage for this moment. Fans also debated parental implications. Mila's reactions, subtle though they were, didn't escape attention. Some commenters pointed out how children pick up on tension even when nothing dramatic is happening. Others assumed the Dina result alone defined the entire family dynamic. Online perception tends to simplify complex emotional realities, turning survival strategies into drama or mistakes, when in truth, much of what played out was about careful navigation and maintaining stability under stress. The contrast between perception and reality is striking. In public, outrage thrives on the obvious: the bombshell confession, the dramatic envelope opening, the momentary silence. But reality is often quieter, layered, and harder to see. Emotional neglect, for instance, isn't a headline. It doesn't make for viral clips on TikTok. Yet it shapes the decisions, responses, and long-term trust between people. Yara's careful behavior, Jovi's tentative gestures, and Mila's silent observation reveal a depth of experience that fans debating online can't fully grasp from clips alone. This public perception gap highlights how easily online audiences miss the psychology beneath the drama. People interpret silence as coldness, composure as manipulation, and small gestures as trivial. Yet these are the exact moments where emotional survival strategies play out, moments that determine whether relationships can endure or quietly fracture. Fans are captivated by shock, but the real story is in the subtlety, gestures, pauses, and choices that signal intent, trust, and awareness. It leaves you thinking, if you were in their shoes, how would you respond? Would you stay, trying to rebuild amid accumulated neglect and tension? Or would you walk away, knowing that emotional distance has already done its damage? The drama online is fun to watch, but the lived experience is messier, quieter, and far more human. The fan conversations continue, and they reveal as much about viewers as the participants themselves. Emotional subtleties are often lost on public debate, yet they are the core of what happened. Every glance, every hesitation, every tiny gesture carries meaning that isn't always visible online. Would you recognize it if you were there? Would your choice match what the internet thinks you should do? Looking back at everything, the biggest lesson is clear. Knowing the truth doesn't automatically fix what's broken. The confession and Dina test revealed facts, but facts alone can't repair years of emotional neglect. What matters most is attention, presence, and care. The daily gestures and listening that build trust and connection over time. Jovi's silence throughout the ordeal isn't just awkward television. It's a real sign of emotional absence, a gap that Yara has had to navigate carefully for her own survival and for Mila's sake. Yara's approach shows resilience under pressure. She isn't seeking revenge or trying to humiliate Jovi. She's protecting herself and her child. Every carefully measured word, every pause, every choice to step back instead of escalate reveals her instinct to survive emotionally and practically. Fans online might focus on drama, but the reality is subtler and heavier. Survival here doesn't make her a villain, it makes her human. The emotional impact ripples across the household. Mila notices tension even when nothing is said. Small moments of withdrawal, quiet gestures of frustration, and lingering uncertainty shape the family's daily life. Jovi's inability to respond actively to emotional crises creates cracks that no confession or test can fill. The episode makes it obvious that emotional neglect accumulates silently, like water slowly wearing down stone, until a dramatic moment finally exposes it. Public perception plays its role too. Fans argue over right and wrong, taking sides based on snippets of video or viral clips. But what's missing online is context, the long buildup, the unspoken frustrations, the invisible labor of care that Yara has provided. The combination of confession, nah test, and fan commentary highlights a core truth. Relationships aren't defined by bombshells. They're defined by everyday attention, or the lack of it, and how each person navigates their own needs alongside others. As the dust settles, the tension hasn't disappeared. The story leaves open questions. Can Jovi re-engage? Will Yara continue to prioritize survival over confrontation? How will Mila's perception of both parents shift as these events continue to unfold? The next episode promises answers, but likely in ways no one is expecting. Next episode, the silence breaks and someone finally reaches their limit. You will not see it coming. Emotions will flare, decisions will have real consequences, and the careful balance of survival and trust will face its toughest test yet. The confession and Dina test set the stage, but the real drama lies in what happens next, and how each choice changes not only the adults' lives, but Mila's future as well. Relationships aren't about bombshells. They're about the quiet, sometimes invisible moments of care, presence, and response. And in this story, those moments are what will make or break everything going forward.